This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Ethiopia declares state of emergency after Tigray forces said they were gaining territory and planning to march on the capital. In Nigeria, desperate relatives wait in agony as rescue efforts continue after Lagos building tragedy. The first major breakthrough in Glasgow as world leaders commit to end deforestation by 2030. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Mtal, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. And tonight I'm alongside my colleague Uche, who has our business headlines. Uche.
Thank you, Richard. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. The U.S. to drop Ethiopia, Mali and Guinea from the AGOA trade deal. And foreign direct investment in Egypt drops 30% as the country reels from the effects of the pandemic. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with me for this hour. Let's start in Nigeria, where scores of people are still feared missing in the country's Lagos city after a building collapsed there. So far, 15 people have been confirmed dead by an emergency management official. 9 have been rescued. The structure, which was under construction, was 21 stories high, located in the upscale neighborhood of Ikoyi. Let's now go to Lagos, to the scene of the tragedy, where we have our correspondent, Deji Badamosi, standing by. Deji, tragic and unfortunate scenes there. These are painful moments for relatives of those who have died in the collapsed building and for those waiting for their loved ones to be rescued. What is the situation right now?
Well, Richard, you're right. I mean, it's a tragic situation, no doubt at all. But as we speak, rescue operation is going on. But I should say that the rescue operation is a painstaking one. The rescuers are trying to be very careful because beneath the rubble, you can see behind me, are human beings. I mean, it's people have said, look, it's possible that you have close to 50 persons beneath the rubble. And so the rescue officials are doing everything to ensure that they're careful, that because earlier they talked about hearing voices from beneath the rubble now. So they want to do everything they can to ensure they get people out of that place alive. Unfortunately, as you have been reporting, 15 persons have been brought out here dead, 9 of course rescued. The hope is that more people will be brought out rescued, alive I should say. And of course, quite a number of the relatives of people trapped in there here, expecting and hoping, of course, that their relatives will be brought out alive. But it's a very tragic situation, quite a painful one. Nobody's happy about this. And let me just quickly bring you up to date with what the state government has done. The state government says it has set up an independent panel to probe what actually happened here. It has also suspended indefinitely now the head of the Lagos State Building Control Agency. Now, we don't know why that suspension was why the suspension was meted out, but we're waiting to still hear further from the state government. The governor has said he would ensure that there's a full disclosure on what actually happened here, that apart from the independent panel, that the government itself is conducting its own probe as well. So the expectation is that in the coming days or weeks, we would get to find out exactly what happened here. How come nothing was done, for instance, about this building here before it came down? The deputy governor of the state said the building was, the site was actually shut down sometime in June for some weeks, and that the developer was told to carry out some amendments, that it was in the course of that amendment that the building came down. But then I think more will still come out in the coming days and weeks. Richard?
Deji, again, a very tragic incident there. Deji, you mentioned that it is a painstaking process that requires delicate removal of rubble. What are the most urgent needs of the rescuers, the relatives, and even the injured. Can you talk about that for us?
Yeah, for the rescuers, I think they've actually not complained about anything at all. I think what they're actually doing is they're just trying to be careful. According to them, we've spoken to the head of the Lagos State Emergency Management Agency. He says they have all the equipment they're required to get people out of this place. So, but that people just have to be patient. For relatives, of course, there's this huge expectation and hope that their relatives who were trapped in there will be brought out alive. But of course, nobody is giving any assurance. The government officials here are not giving any assurance at all, but they've said they will do everything possible, even if it takes more than today, that they'll get to ground zero. By ground zero, they mean they'll get to the last floor to ensure that they evacuate the entire rubble here, if not evacuate everything, but at least get to the ground floor to ensure that everyone who is trapped here is brought out, either dead or alive. Unfortunately, of course, time is not on their side. It's a painstaking process. This is the first time this city will be dealing with a situation as this, 21-story building. It has never happened before. And so you have this huge pile of rubble that they actually have to deal with. And to get to ground zero will definitely take a lot. So they're just asking for patience and appealing to the relatives of those who are trapped in there to just be patient, exercise patience, cooperate, and promising that they're going to ensure that those who are alive are rescued. So, but honestly, Richard, it's a very sad situation, quite sad and tragic, of course.
Deji, sad is an understatement. It's hard to imagine what the relatives are going through. Once again, Deji Badmus, thank you for covering that story for us. Well, staying in Nigeria, 6 people have been abducted from the University of Abuja staff quarters, according to officials. Now, the university on social media said the incident occurred in the early hours of Tuesday morning from around midnight to 1 a.m. local time. It confirmed 4 staff and their children were taken. This is the first attack of its kind in Abuja, but there has been a wave of school abductions in Nigeria that began late last year. There has been no immediate claim of responsibility for the attack. Security forces say they have launched a rescue operation following the incident. Ethiopia has passed a decision to declare martial law to be put in place for 6 months. Now, this comes after forces from the Tigray People's Liberation Front said they were gaining territory in the country's Amhara region and are now planning to head towards the capital, Addis Ababa. In reaction to this, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has called for Ethiopians to take up arms and defend themselves. The governments of 4 of the country's 10 regions have also called on citizens to mobilize themselves in the fight against the TPLF. The rebel leaders from the northern region say they have in the last few days claimed the towns of Dessie, Kombolcha, and Burka, all in Amhara. The government later said the TPLF fighters had killed 100 youth in Kombolcha. The TPLF says that once it succeeds in removing the government, it will establish an interim one and engage in national dialogue. CGTN's Gurum Chala is live in Addis Ababa for us. Gurum, we know that the Tigray forces said they are planning on marching on the capital, but what reasons is the government giving for declaring the state of emergency, and how will this affect the citizens?
Richard, first of all, the state here feels like there is all around insecurity because of what you've just mentioned, of the TPLF's advancement and the plan of marching to Addis Ababa, the capital city that is. So there is a need to declare a state of emergency. This is a nationwide state of emergency, and we will have lots of restrictions into it. And one of them being there are going to be curfews, and then another one is people are not going to be allowed to gather without noticing the authorities here, and also movement will be restricted at the same time. So the state of emergency is not the first thing in Ethiopia. We've seen it before in different situations, but this one is because the government is saying that the nation's sovereignty, territorial integrity is endangered. As we've said, TPLF is also planning, has already said it has merged with OLA, the Oromo Liberation army itself, and they are planning to march to Addis Ababa. That is also an important trait for the central government. So this is definitely going to affect people's lives, but the government feels like this is a necessary step to take.
All right, Gerum Shala, let's leave it there for now. Thank you for keeping a close eye on that story as well. Much appreciated. Now, the United Nations mission in Central African Republic is accusing the country's presidential guard of opening fire on unarmed Egyptian peacekeepers and wounding 10 of them. The CAR government has denied this. The UN mission, known as MINUSCA, said in a statement that the Egyptian peacekeepers had just arrived at the capital Bangui airport on Monday when they, quote, suffered heavy fire from the presidential guards without any prior warning or response, even though they were unarmed, close quote. The United Nations Special Envoy in Sudan says national and international mediation efforts to solve the political unrest in the country are expected to bear fruits in the coming days. Politicians involved in the mediation say the main proposal under the discussion is to give full executive powers to depose Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, who would appoint a cabinet composed of technocrats. Political parties, rebel groups, and the military would all be represented in parliament, and the army will continue to lead a Security and Defense Council. The Ministry of Information, representing civilian authorities, says Hamdok maintains that the solution to the crisis is a release of all detained officials as well as a return of his cabinet to work. Meanwhile, correspondent Patrick Oyet has more on the South Sudanese delegation in Sudan.
South Sudan's government delegation, headed by the National Security Advisor to President Salva Kiir, traveled to Khartoum on Sunday. The delegation is pushing for conflicting parties in Sudan to resolve their disagreements through dialogue. The South Sudan's President Salva Kiir is urging Sudan's military leader Al-Fatah al-Burhan to provide space for negotiations. South Sudan says if Sudan's crisis is not resolved, it can become a regional problem. The House of Sudan's Prime Minister is still heavily guarded by the army. Protests are ongoing. Doctors, railway and oil workers have all joined a civil disobedience movement to try and force the military to hand over power to the civilians. South Sudan's oil passes through Sudan on its way to the international market. The Juba government is concerned that continuous conflict in Sudan will negatively affect oil flow, which funds 98% of the country's budget. President Salva Kiir says he is keen for an end to the Sudan's conflict. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Let's now get more updates from the ground from Naba Muhaddin, our correspondent in Khartoum. Let's take a listen.
We can say 70%. It's not a certain or determined number, but we can say like over 50% of life is getting back to normal. But still, there is fears, and people are skeptical about because the dispute is not solved yet. So they are skeptical about any sudden turmoil again. Also, there is escalation from pro-democracy groups because there is no demand, like the demands are not fulfilled yet. The Prime Minister is still in the house arrest, and the generals are still insisting on their formation of their government. In the same time, there is a deadlock. Yes, there is mediation efforts internally and internationally to contain the dispute, but it seems like the crisis is still growing and there is no solution on ground. So yes, there is escalation from time to time, and the pro-democracy groups has just announced next 1 million march on November the 7th, and there is calls for civil disobedience if Hamdok is not back again. About the UN envoy, he met Hamdok and he said he's in a good health in his house in Kafuri, north of Khartoum. And also Hamdok has notified the Turweka countries that he is insisting on restoring his government and to be appointed as a prime minister again, and not to be a part of any military arrangements. He don't want military solutions. Military has announced that they don't mind Hamdok to be a prime minister again, but to appoint a technocrat. But Hamdok notified many countries and many envoys that he will not be part of any military arrangements, and he wants the politicians to be released from detention. And it seems like everybody is sticking on their mind, and the street is, the anger is growing, but the dispute remains in its place.
The COP26 climate summit in Glasgow reached a major agreement to protect the world's forests. More than 100 leaders committed on Tuesday to end and reverse deforestation and land degradation by the end of the decade. $19 billion will be devoted to the cause, including $1.7 billion for indigenous people. The backers include Brazil, Indonesia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and together they account for 85% of the world's forests. Plants absorb roughly 30% of carbon dioxide emissions, but an area of forest larger than the United Kingdom was lost last year. African leaders have called for a fair deal at the ongoing COP26 conference in Glasgow. Now, during their speeches, the leaders stressed their commitment to taking significant steps to combat climate change. CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy reports.
African heads of state have committed to prioritize actions that help the continent adapt to the impacts of climate change. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, while addressing delegates, said it's important for countries to embrace low carbon emission and develop resilience to control climate change.
What we need now is to recognize that we are in a race against time, and we need unanimity of purpose. We need boldness and unwavering political commitment to achieve the 1.5-degree pathway.
Science is clear that we only have a small window of opportunity to ensure that we collectively take decisive action and prevent the negative impact of climate change.
Malawian President Lazarus Chakwera urged nations to answer the calls of millions of Africans affected by the devastating effects of climate change.
We must answer them by establishing timelines for replacing all toxic technologies with clean ones. We must answer them through bilateral and multilateral relations that build green economies. And as you consider your answer, know that neither Africa in general nor Malawi in particular will take no for an answer.
On his part, the Liberian President George Weah called for a united global front in addressing the climate crisis.
Together, we can make a difference as a shared community of global citizens with a common destiny. Together, we can heal the world from the scourges of climate change. Together, we can save this earth from the deadly consequences of global warming.
The 2021 UN Climate Change Conference is a crucial moment for efforts to address the climate crisis. World leaders are expected to come up with key resolutions to keep the rise in the global average temperature to below 2 degrees. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
In the lead up to the COP26 United Nations Climate Conference in Glasgow this week, China unveiled a white paper detailing the country's low-carbon efforts over years. Our reporter Zhou Zhixian has more.
For decades, coal in China, the world's biggest developing country, has been a major source of energy security. To tackle global warming, China has pledged to cap the fossil fuels, even while facing an energy crunch.
Sky News. Clean and low-carbon energy is crucial to future sustainable development. In recent years, China has been largely adjusting and upgrading the energy structure by diverting heavy reliance on coal to low-carbon consumption.
China says it had decreased the proportion of coal in the mix from 72% in 2005 to 57% in 2020. And for the first time, the installed capacity of renewable energy is expected to surpass that of coal-fired power generation in 2021.
China has integrated those emission reduction targets into its broader social and development planning and strategy. And with those combination of command and control policy together with market-based policy and also standard policy to deliver its target. For this year, China has launched the largest carbon trading scheme in the world to increase the cost efficiency of those policy and matters.
This September, China told the UN it will halt new coal projects overseas. To fill in the energy vacuum, China vows to step up wind and solar power, 1.2 billion kilowatts in its total installed capacity by 2030, also a test of the resilience of its electricity network.
Indeed, it seems to be a very harsh and difficult target for China. But I think it is feasible given the experience of China to reduce carbon emission in the last decade. If we keep the pace, we can achieve the target for 2030.
And that target compared to the 2005 level is to lower its greenhouse gas emissions per unit of GDP by over 65%, while increasing the share of non-fossil fuel energy consumption to around 25%.
Achieving the peak of carbon emission is an integral part of China's ecological civilization. That means it is the internal demand to make weather clean, to prevent global warming. That's very important.
Ahead of this week's climate conference in Glasgow, China says parties should continue their support for poor countries in funding, technology and capacity building and transform goals into action. Zhou Jiaxing, CGTN, Beijing.
You're watching Africa Live. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news stories. Here's what's ahead. Coming up, Ethiopia's cultural heritage dealt a heavy blow by the conflict in the north.
Again, he can holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for sticking with us. Military representatives from Libyan rival sides announced on Monday a breakthrough on the evacuation of foreign fighters with the help of neighboring countries. The UN says that evacuating all foreign troops and mercenaries from Libya is essential for the peaceful transition towards general elections in December. Here is Adel El-Mahroui with more.
Egypt hosted the UN-sponsored meeting between Libyan military representatives and officials from Sudan, Chad and Niger. Libya's 5+5 Joint Military Commission discussed with these nations the means to evacuate foreign fighters in Libya who are nationals of these three neighbors south of Libya. After 3 days of negotiations, on Monday the three countries said they will cooperate and coordinate to evacuate all of these fighters.
The most important outcome of this meeting is that we've moved from agreeing on evacuating mercenaries into planning executable steps. We began with the group of countries south of Libya, Sudan, Chad and Niger. The next step will be to hold another meeting in Turkey.
The resolution statement of the conference, however, didn't announce a timeline for the evacuation. Libyan officials say implementing a departure plan for foreign fighters is complex.
We have different types of mercenaries. There are groups of mercenaries who are not attributed to one nation. There are those from Syria, which Turkey brought. And there are those from our neighboring countries. Each group must be dealt with differently. The groups from the southern countries are rebels who have major disputes with the ruling governments.
The Libyan National Army, or LNA, says that logistically evacuating foreign mercenaries and fighters could take up to 10 days. But that assumes that Libyan forces will not face resistance from these groups. The Libyan interim government, the Presidency Council, the LNA and the Parliament all agree that evacuating foreign fighters and mercenaries is essential to avoid any security interruptions during the expected December 24 elections. What should comfort Libyans is that so far there seems to be international consensus for Libyans to hold their elections on time. On November 12, France is set to host an international conference that should support Libya's march towards the ballot box. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
The war in northern Ethiopia has seen the destruction or damage to ancient churches and a famed mosque. Ethiopians are taking stock of losses to their prized cultural heritage as fighting nears the one-year mark. CGTN's Joy Karuki Juma reports.
Fentau Alemu is a tour guide who fled fighting in Lalibela in northern Ethiopia. He found refuge for himself and his family in the capital Addis Ababa. Lalibela is a UNESCO World Heritage Site famed for its distinctive rock-cut churches where thousands of pilgrims visit each year. But Alemu says there is no evidence of damage or looting in the historical sites.
No harm has been done to the church according to the information I have so far. A buffer zone has been created around the church. An area has been designated where people cannot go beyond that line. I can only say thank God there is no damage to the church so far.
But the story is not the same in Aksum city, known for its ancient relics. The Al-Najashi Mosque, said to have been built by Prophet Muhammad's first disciples who had escaped persecution in Mecca, stands in ruins. Ruins attributed to the heavy fighting between Tigrayan forces and government troops in November 2020.
Our treasures are in danger at this moment because of this conflict. These treasures could be from the 4th or the 5th or even earlier centuries if a serious study is carried out on them. The treasures in our country are very ancient that we cannot find them elsewhere or replace them.
The hope for many Ethiopians is that their prized sites of worship and pilgrimage will be preserved and that the fighting will end. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Nigeria joins the world in marking the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists as it seeks to strengthen action to guarantee safety for news gathering and reporting. The United Nations designates November the 2nd each year to mark the day. Our correspondent Tessa McKendy reports on how journalists are battling to practice their professions in the face of attacks.
Funom Joshua is a journalist who has been attacked more than once in the line of duty.
They attacked and killed a traditional leader in that particular community. We went there to cover. Upon reaching that particular place, the local people there were not happy with the situation, and we came where more of strangers in that particular community. They were not happy. They saw us, they attacked, they tore my shirt, beat my cameraman, spoiled part of the camera, and I lost one of my jacket.
While Funom managed to survive the attacks, some of his colleagues haven't been as lucky. The Center Against Brutality and Safety of Journalists in Africa says at least 5 journalists were killed in Nigeria last year. The Premium Times Center for Investigative Journalism says about 160 journalists were attacked in the country in the last 2 years. A 2020 analysis by the Committee to Protect Journalists says 83% of the cases do not lead to a successful prosecution.
Journalists are known to speak the truth. They are known to stand firm for the truth. And they make sure they dig out the truth, unearth things that, will change society. And because in a democracy they are very, very important, you find out that attacks from everywhere, they get attacked because they speak the truth.
But security experts say preventing attacks on journalists and ending impunity against them is a responsibility of the government.
It is there in our constitution the right of every human being must be protected, and lives and property must be protected. It is one of the mainstay of government. So in this case, journalists have a right which has been declared in a charter.
Reporters Without Borders describes the country as one of West Africa's most dangerous for journalists. The government says it is working towards increased safety of journalists. The government in November last year vowed to end impunity for crimes against journalists in the country. It also committed to increased access to justice to ensure that never again will Nigeria feature among nations where journalists suffer from any form of impunity. With such commitments, journalists like Funom Joshua hope attacks on them will end, while making the country a safer place for the practice of journalism. Tassim Akendi, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
Zimbabwe's health ministry has approved the use of China's Sinovac COVID-19 vaccine for 16 and 17-year-olds following recommendations from specialist pediatricians. The South African nation is still considering whether to vaccinate younger children. Brian Wakatuya reports.
Zimbabwe's health ministry says the decision to start vaccinating 16 and 17-year-olds had been taken based on available scientific data and with guidance from the national drug regulator, the Medicines Control Authority of Zimbabwe. The country is widening the bracket of eligible groups to receive the jabs to accelerate its national vaccination program to achieve its target herd immunity by the end of the year. The country plans to inoculate about 10 million people by December 31st. To date, 38% of the target population has been vaccinated. Zimbabwe has approved the use of 5 vaccines, namely China's Sinopharm and Sinovac, Russia's Sputnik V, Indian-made Covaxin, and Johnson & Johnson's Janssen jab. The government says the vaccination protocol for children under the age of 16 is still being evaluated. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
All right, time now for our business segment with Uche. Uche, over to you.
Thanks, Richard. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. The U.S. to drop Ethiopia, Mali and Guinea from the AGOA trade deal. And foreign direct investment in Egypt drops 30% as the country reels from effects of the pandemic.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Now, the United States government is expected to remove Ethiopia, Mali and Guinea from the deal that grants them duty-free access to the United States. The move comes amid an ongoing conflict and famine in Ethiopia's northern region of Tigray and after coups in Guinea and Mali. Now, President Joe Biden said that Ethiopia is not in compliance with the African Growth and Opportunity Act's eligibility requirements due to gross violations of internationally recognized human rights. He further said that Guinea and Mali have not made progress towards establishing rule of law and political pluralism. Now, U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai said in a statement that she would provide the countries with clear benchmarks for getting back into compliance with AGOA's requirements and also work with them to achieve that objective. Ethiopia is extremely disappointed by the United States decision. The Ethiopian Ministry of Trade said on Tuesday that the government takes all human rights allegations seriously. It also added that the government is conducting investigation and is committed to ensuring accountability. And moving on now, South Africa's gasoline prices are set to rise to a record on Wednesday. According to the Central Energy Fund, the retail cost of 95-octane gasoline will climb by almost 7% to about $1.26 a litre. Now, the reasons behind the latest increase, which will be the fourth in the past 5 months, are higher average oil prices, a weaker rand, and higher levies on petrol and diesel. This is adding to inflationary pressures in an economy that imports almost all of its fuel. Fuel accounts for almost 5% of South Africa's inflation basket, and higher costs relative to 2020 have been driving price growth this year. Annual inflation quickened to a 4-month high of 5% in September. Meanwhile, in Uganda, farmers are increasing their coffee production capacity as global prices for coffee shoot up because of reduced harvests from Brazil. Now, latest market figures from Uganda's Coffee Development Authority show that the country exported coffee at an average price of $1.90 per kilo in September, and about 11 cents higher. That is about 11 cents higher than in August 2021. Here's CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga, who spent a day at a coffee farm and filed this report.
Christopher Wali tends his coffee plants. He wants to tap into the rising coffee prices.
From this quarter garden, I'm expecting about 500 kilograms because I have 4 pieces of land and I have planted newer coffee, which by next year it's going to start giving me.
He farms organic coffee. Wali has been growing coffee for the last 10 years, but he says the growing demand for coffee on the world market is a major boost to his income. He's now expanding his plantation to make more money. In the previous season, Brazil posted low yields after plantations were destroyed by drought and frost. Trade analysts say it may take 5 years for the world's top producer to bounce back, which is advantageous to coffee producers in Africa.
The only way we can take advantage, especially for Arabica, is that this is the time for you to dominate the market and show the quality and the capacity you have as Uganda. Yes, we've been posting, 400 bags or something, but now this is the time to show that you have a capacity of 7 million bags, of 10 million bags, so that you increase from number 7 producer of coffee globally to number 2.
Latest figures from the Uganda Coffee Development Authority show that the country earned close to $630 million this year compared to about $512 million last year. Uganda's target is to produce more than 20 million bags by 2035. To compete favorably on the world market, the Uganda government is encouraging its farmers to maintain quality while doing post-harvest handling.
It is through post-harvest handling that much of our products have been failing to match international standards. Now that we are focusing at grassroots, I'm very sure we shall achieve the desired results by having totally minimizing the losses.
The country's coffee agency is hopeful that it could see an increase in coffee exports driven by the increasing global coffee prices. And this means more money for farmers like Christopher Wali. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Meanwhile, in Egypt, foreign direct investment has dropped 30% over the last 3 years, and that's partly due to effects of the coronavirus. The country, however, still received the highest amount in FDI over the period compared to other African counterparts. Now, amount of investment dropped from $7.5 billion to $5.2 billion. And here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the details.
A main source of hard currency for Egypt, foreign direct investments have not yet fully recovered from the effects of the coronavirus pandemic.
Foreign investments in the last 6 months reached $3.4 billion against $5 billion in the year before. There is an apparent slowdown. The energy and gas sector are the main attractions for investors after the latest huge gas discoveries. Also, real estate projects and tourism sectors, especially new cities, is encouraging. So, the activity in the real estate as well as building touristic villages and tourist destinations.
Egypt is still a top attractor of foreign direct investments in the continent. However, with its strong infrastructure, economic growth and big population, experts believe it should attract even much more investor inflows. Most of the non-petroleum investments have been in the services and real estate sectors, whilst the government is targeting the manufacturing industries.
After the strong infrastructure built by Egypt and the aggressive economic reforms in the last few years, the base is there to flourish. Now, there must be more emphasis on the industrial sector. It has to be well promoted to attract investors. I think it should prosper soon.
One manufacturer is Amr Fatouh, a top producer of polycarbonate sheets. He says the country has big potential.
Egypt's geographical and strategic location in the center of the world and connecting several continents make it ideal for investments. Egypt's economy has absorbed that shock from the pandemic because we had ongoing mega infrastructure projects which employed a large number of workers and sustained the economy. The challenges we have now are similar everywhere. Problems in shipping, in the supply chain, which has been broken up. We expected and hope it will recover soon.
The government has also been trying to fix a depleted and complicated bureaucratic system that has for decades pushed many investors away. Experts acknowledge the efforts by the state, but say more would be welcomed.
I'm calling on the government to continue on its path to provide more facilities and relax regulations for the local businessmen, because the foreign investor would enter the market when he sees the Egyptian businessmen are succeeding.
Analysts believe once the economic fallout from the coronavirus pandemic is diminished, the FDIs will pour back into the North African country. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's now get the latest from the COP26 Climate Summit sessions in Glasgow. Here's Nawid Jabrakil reporting from London.
It's the first major breakthrough of the COP26 Climate Summit. More than 100 countries signing up to a pledge to stop and reverse deforestation by 2030. In total, the nations involved cover 85% of the world's forests.
More leaders than ever before have now signed up to protect our forests, from countries in the north and the south with temperate forests, tropical forests, and including nations like China, Russia, Brazil, some of the largest forest estates in the world.
Greener policies will need money. More than $19 billion has been pledged from both governments and the private sector to help save forests. From one Amazon to another, one of the world's richest men, Jeff Bezos, fresh from his exploits in space, has pledged $2 billion, saying businesses must play their role in paying for the cleanup.
Looking back at Earth from up there, the atmosphere seems so thin, the world so finite and so fragile.
Much of the new funding will go towards helping developing countries, among them India. Its leader Narendra Modi says his country will be net zero by 2070. That's 20 years later than this summit is calling for. He's announced a new scheme to help island nations combat climate change, along with his British and Australian counterparts.
All of us are here because we believe in fair and practical action to address climate change. We're here because we're family, particularly amongst our Pacific family.
Meanwhile, China's climate envoy, who's leading the country's delegation, said a lot of progress has been made.
For the past 8 years, China has been the world leader in terms of investments in renewable energy and accounts for a third of the global total installed capacity. Because of our efforts, the cost of renewables has come down and is now competitive compared to conventional energy sources.
Many of the rich and powerful will be moving on from Scotland after day 2, leaving their officials behind to work out the finer details. Despite the new pledges trickling in, critics say the plans don't go far enough. As world leaders gathered inside, protests continued across Glasgow. There's certainly some action on climate change here, but the key question still hangs over this summit and humanity. Will it be enough? Naweed Jabarkil, CGTN, London.
And still on climate matters, Gabon is betting that careful logging can safeguard the vast wealth of its forests by halving carbon emissions associated with its oil industry while also producing more timber. Now, Gabon's relatively untouched share of the Congo Basin rainforest makes it one of the world's most forested countries. It's a haven for endangered animals and one of the few net absorbers of climate warming carbon.
How Central African countries like Gabon manage their share of the world's second largest rainforest is critical. The so-called lungs of Africa, which store more carbon per hectare than the Amazon, help to regulate temperatures and generate rain for millions in the arid Sahel region and distant Ethiopian highlands.
It's heart-wrenching because we're destroying part of the environment in a way. But what else can we do? We cut it down because we are asked to. We have to cut this tree, get it out, and sell it so we can make a living.
But with the oil industry that fuels 45% of its economy facing decline, self-styled Green Gabon wants to ramp up other industries while maintaining its forest cover above 85%. Forest Minister Lee White believes logging is part of the solution.
We have developed this economic model whereby we're doing sustainable forestry. We might cut this one tree here in this hectare. We cut 1 to 2 trees per hectare, and then we leave the forest alone for 25 years to regrow.
Gabon reckons it can maintain the forest allotted to logging concessions, which cover 60% of the country. The wood's legal credentials are checked before it is stacked for processing. Some trunks are turned into plywood sheets, while others into high-end furniture.
There has to be a fair deal for Gabon. And we believe the fair deal does involve sustainable forestry. Human beings have used wood for hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years. If you do it right, you keep the forest. If you do it wrong, you lose the forest. And so we're trying to do it right. And we are determined to maintain our forest cover and maintain these ecosystem services. But we have to create jobs and livelihoods for the young people of Gabon.
Instead of the $200 per cubic meter Gabon once earned from raw wood exports, plywood fetches $500 and furniture up to $3,000, while the extra processing has created 8,000 new jobs.
We cut today the same quantity of wood than we used to cut 10 years back. The difference is we have a lot of value added by doing the industrialization locally. So we can get maybe 5 times what we use to get by doing the local transformation of the wood and creating also a lot of jobs for nationals, people, of course, yeah.
The forest is really enormous. This means if we can cut and we reforest, it will always provide. We are in the Mayumba forest area. We are not really worried about the destruction of the vegetation because if we can cut and replant, there will be no problem. But we really we pray that foreign companies set up and develop the area.
The means of limiting emissions promoted by the Nature Conservancy is part of Gabon's forest plan. This means making sure concessions track their carbon impact, build narrower roads, fell trees while causing the least damage, and using less destructive equipment. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, as COP26 goes on, leaders from African nations and counterparts from other developing countries call on richer counterparts to halt rising global temperatures. More on that coming up at top of the hour. For now, back to you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. And we are not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up in just a moment. Here's a peek at the headlines. South Africa boosts semifinals hope after a 6-wicket victory over Bangladesh.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome into Sport on Africa Live. In cricket, a dismal Bangladesh were bowled for 84 with 10 balls to spare by a fast-paced South Africa side. Anrich Nortje claimed a devastating 3 for 8 with fellow fast bowler Kagiso Rabada taking 3 for 20 in Abu Dhabi. South Africa slipped 33 for 3 to give Bangladesh hope before an unbeaten 31 from captain Timba Bavuma saw the Proteas home with 39 balls left. Rabada claimed 3 wickets and 5 balls to dismantle the top order, including trapping Sumya Sarkar for a fast first ball duck as Bangladesh struggled through the power play overs. South Africa are second in Group I with behind England with top 2 teams qualifying for the knockout stages. The Proteas will face England on Saturday for the first game before the semis. Now on to some new developments where former FIFA officials